Dear viewers of Second Chapter Stories, may this quiet moment find you safe, warm, and gently accompanied no matter where you are watching from. Tonight, I invite you into a story shaped by winter light, long shadows, and the fragile courage it takes to begin again. Her name is Eleanor Whitfield, 72 years old, living in a modest, book-lined Victorian home in Toronto. 5 years ago, she lost her husband, Arthur. Since then, she has lost something else as well, the ability to sleep. And now, in the deep winter of her solitude, she fears not the darkness outside her windows, but the darkness within her own quiet rooms. This is where we begin. The first space that opens before us is Eleanor's study, a narrow room warmed only by a single brass lamp. It is 3 o'clock in the morning, though no clock is needed to tell the hour. The night has thinned into that delicate stillness when even the city seems to breathe more slowly. Snow clings to the edges of the window pane, its dim reflection casting a pale shimmer across the spines of the books that rise in tall, disciplined rows. Eleanor sits at her desk, her back straight, her hands folded with an academic precision that has survived every season of her life. The house around her is immaculate, too immaculate, in the way that grief sometimes is when it chooses order as a shield. The scent of old paper, lemon polish, and the faint chill of winter stone lingers in the air. Behind her, a single armchair remains untouched. Arthur's chair. Even now, she avoids looking at it directly. In front of her lies an open history text, thick with footnotes, but she has not turned a page in an hour. Her eyes drift instead toward the darkened window, where her reflection hovers faintly, a thin, silver-haired woman whose exhaustion has softened the once sharp lines of her scholar's face. She studies this reflection the way she once studied ancient maps, searching for meaning in the faintest contours, searching for a path through unfamiliar territory. But what she sees unsettles her, the unmistakable tremor of fatigue beneath her eyes, the pallor that sits like frost along her cheekbones. A quiet fear flickers through her, brief yet unmistakable. Outside, the wind shifts. A dry branch scrapes against the gutter, a small sound that startles in the stillness. Eleanor blinks, closes the book with deliberate care, and pushes her glasses up the bridge of her nose. The silence of the house presses closer, heavy as a winter quilt. It is not peaceful silence, nor contemplative silence, but the kind that gathers in corners and lingers in hallways, the silence of a life lived without witness. Her gaze travels across Arthur's meticulously kept library, volumes he treasured, annotated in his neat, slanted hand. For 5 years she has been cataloging them, arranging and rearranging them according to systems only she understands. It is a task without end. A ritual meant to occupy the hours when most of the world sleeps. Every book returned to its precise place feels like an assertion of control, a refusal to let the disorder of grief take root. Yet tonight, something is different. As her eyes return to her reflection, she feels the sharp sting of recognition. She has become a figure suspended between night and morning, living in a house that has not heard her laughter in half a decade. Softly, almost imperceptibly, she exhales. Her breath fogs the glass of the window. The moment is brief, but it is the first shift in a long, unbroken ritual of silence. The night holds its breath with her. It is a winter afternoon in Toronto, the kind that turns the sky into a dull sheet of pewter. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the light has already begun to fade, sinking early behind low buildings and bare branches glazed with ice. Eleanor, wrapped in a dark wool coat buttoned all the way to her throat, walks carefully along the narrow sidewalk toward the small grocery store 2 blocks from her house. The air stings her cheeks, her breath unfolds in small clouds before her, then disappears. She carries a canvas bag folded under one arm, a handwritten list in her gloved hand. Milk, tea, apples, bread. A list so simple it almost feels like a message from another life, a quieter time when fatigue did not stand beside her like a shadow. Her body moves through the cold on a kind of automatic pilot. She has slept perhaps 1 hour the night before, a thin, fractured hour between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning. The world around her seems slightly tilted, as though someone has shifted it a degree to the left without warning. The bell above the grocery store door gives a tired chime as she enters. Inside, the air smells of oranges and floor cleaner. Fluorescent lights flatten the colors, make everything look slightly unreal. She nods curtly at the young man behind the counter, who recognizes her as the quiet older woman who always pays in cash and never lingers in conversation. Eleanor moves through the aisles with practiced certainty. She takes the same brand of tea, the same loaf of seeded bread, the same modest carton of milk. She selects apples one by one, weighing them in her hand with academic scrutiny, as if grading papers. The routine soothes her, a fragile illusion of normality. Then, as she turns toward the refrigerated section, the edges of the shelves seem to blur. The labels swim for a heartbeat. A low hum begins in her ears, like distant machinery. She pauses, hand resting on the metal handle of the fridge door, breathing carefully, waiting for the world to settle. It does not. A strange, light-headed sensation rises from her chest, as though her body has suddenly become too light to hold its own weight. Her fingers slip from the handle. The floor tilts. The carton of milk she has just taken from the shelf slides from her grasp, falling in a slow, surreal arc. There is the sharp crack of plastic on tile, the pale bloom of milk spilling outward like an unexpected snowfall. Then, a different sound. The dull, unmistakable impact of bone against unforgiving ground. The pain in her wrist is instant and astonishing, a white-hot flash that courses up her arm and steals her breath. For a moment, she does not understand what has happened. She finds herself on the floor, her coat twisted beneath her, her body folded in an awkward angle. The overhead lights glare into her eyes. Someone is speaking. The young cashier, his voice pitched with alarm, kneels beside her. A woman from the next aisle hovers, clutching a basket of onions. Eleanor can hear words, "Are you all right? Can you move? Should we call someone?" But they seem to arrive from very far away. She tries to rise, but the moment she puts weight on her left hand, a fierce, tearing pain erupts. The world narrows to that wrist, to the unnatural angle of it, already beginning to swell. A hollow wave of nausea rolls through her. For the first time in a long time, she feels something akin to panic. Later, in the hospital, the doctor speaks gently of fractures and recovery times. The word fall repeats itself in the conversation, as if naming the event might somehow explain it. Eleanor hears other words too: chronic fatigue, sleep deprivation, dangerous at your age. They land with the dull weight of verdicts. When they ask whom they should call, she hesitates. There is only one answer, and it is a name she has avoided saying aloud in this context: Clara. By 7 o'clock in the evening, in a quiet hospital room, the door opens and Clara steps inside, carrying the scent of the outside world with her. Her hair, streaked with early gray, is pulled back in a loose knot. Lines of worry frame her eyes. She looks first at the cast on her mother's wrist, then at her mother's face. "Mother," she says, and the single word is both accusation and relief. Eleanor sits upright, hospital bracelet glaring against her skin like a small insult. Between them hangs the uneasy history of years measured in brief visits, careful phone calls, conversations that skim the surface rather than risk the depths. "You did not need to come all this way," Eleanor says quietly. "I am perfectly capable of..." "Of what?" Clara interrupts, her voice tight. "Falling alone in a grocery store? Breaking your wrist because you are too exhausted to stand properly?" She takes a deep breath, forcing her tone back under control. "You have not been sleeping for years. You know that." The words settle like ash. Eleanor looks away, toward the window where the night has gathered. Trees bend in the wind, their branches like ink on a dark page. "It is not so simple," Eleanor murmurs. "It is exactly that simple," Clara replies. "You are 72 years old, living alone in a house that might as well be a museum. You will not ask for help. You will not take care of yourself. You will not move somewhere safer. What are you waiting for, another fall? Something worse?" The question slices through the air. Eleanor stiffens, wounded pride rising to meet it. "My house is not a museum," she says. "It is my home. Our home. Your father's home." Clara's expression softens for a moment at the mention of Arthur, then hardens again with a different kind of sorrow. "Mother, you are keeping it like a shrine," she says. "You barely live in it. You haunt it. You walk its corridors at night like a ghost. I spoke with the doctor. This fall could have been much more serious. You need support. You need change." The last word echoes strangely between them. Eleanor's jaw tightens. "I do not need change. I need rest. That is all." "And how exactly do you plan to get that?" Clara's voice rises despite herself. "By reading yourself into oblivion? By pacing through the night until your body gives out? This is not sustainable, and you know it. I am terrified every time the phone rings that it will be someone telling me you are—" She stops, unable to finish. The unsaid word gone hangs between them like invisible smoke. The silence that follows is long and heavy. Finally, Clara inhales, steadies herself, and says, with deliberate care, "I think we should talk about selling the house, about finding somewhere smaller, somewhere with people around, somewhere you are not alone with those books and that empty bed." The suggestion strikes Eleanor with the force of a blow. For a moment, she cannot answer. In her mind, she sees the Victorian house, the narrow staircase, the study with its lamp and darkened window, Arthur's chair, the shelves of carefully preserved books. To imagine leaving, it feels like erasing the map of her own life. "No," she says at last, the word absolute. "You have no right to ask that of me." Clara flinches. "I have every right. I am your daughter. I want you to live, not just endure." "You presume to understand what I need," Eleanor replies, her voice low but sharp. "You live on the other side of the country. You visit twice a year. You do not see how I manage." "I see enough," Clara says, and there is a tremor beneath her control now. "I see your hands shaking. I see the circles under your eyes. I see a broken wrist that did not have to happen. This fall," she gestures toward the cast, "this is not an accident. This is a consequence." The word hangs in the air, consequence. Eleanor turns her face away. Shame and anger and something like fear churn within her, a storm she cannot tidy into neat categories. She has lived for 5 years in a carefully constructed solitude, convinced that she was the only one bearing its weight. Now she sees that the burden has been shared, silently, by a daughter watching from a distance, helpless. "I will not leave that house," she whispers. Clara closes her eyes briefly, then opens them with a weary resolve. "Then something else has to change," she says, "because if it does not, the next phone call I get may not be from a hospital. It may be from someone asking me to identify a body." The words are brutal, but they land with a clarity that no gentle persuasion could have achieved. For the first time, Eleanor glimpses the shape of her isolation as others see it. Not as noble endurance, but as a quiet, steady self-destruction that reaches beyond her own life. Outside, snow begins to fall again, soft and inexorable, blurring the edges of the city. In the small hospital room, 2 women sit in a shared, painful stillness, mother and daughter, separated by grief, joined by fear. Between them, invisible but undeniable, a fissure has opened. Through that crack, without either of them knowing it yet, the first possibility of change has slipped in. A week has passed since the fall, and winter has tightened its grip on Toronto. The days are short, pale things. The evenings arrive early, cloaked in a deep blue that presses softly against the windows. Inside Eleanor's living room, a fire burns with carefully arranged precision, its glow touching the rows of books that rise like solemn guardians along the walls. Clara is here moving through the house with the quiet purposefulness of someone trying to help without intruding, tending to her mother's injury while navigating the fragile terrain of their strained affection. Eleanor sits on the sofa, her left wrist encased in a stiff white cast, her posture as upright as ever. She has spread several books across the coffee table. Medical guides, research texts on insomnia, psychological studies, monographs on grief. It is her instinctive response to fear, to gather information like a fortress. She adjusts her glasses with her uninjured hand and reads with fierce determination, as though the right arrangement of knowledge might hold back the tides that have eroded her life. Clara watches from the armchair opposite her, her face softened by equal parts compassion and exhaustion. "Mother," she says gently, "you do not have to solve yourself." Eleanor does not look up. "Do not be absurd. Of course I must." She turns another page with stiff, precise movements. Bullet points, charts, case studies. She is devouring data the way others might cling to prayer. Her mind searches for patterns, anything that might explain the labyrinth of sleepless nights and the hollow ache of her loss. But grief is not an academic subject, and the printed words feel cold against the rawness inside her. On the low table, a bottle of sleeping pills sits unopened, its label bright in the firelight. Clara eyes it, then speaks carefully. "The doctor said they could help, for now, at least." Eleanor closes her book. "Medication does not restore what has been taken," she replies. "It only blunts one's awareness of the absence." Clara exhales slowly. "Your awareness is not helping you either." The conversation settles into the familiar rhythm of gentle disagreement. They have lived like this for years, circling each other with careful phrases, each protecting their own fragile truths. Clara rises, gathers the empty teacups, and drifts into the kitchen. The house feels almost alive with their shared tension. Left alone, Eleanor studies the pill bottle again. Its presence feels accusatory, as though it is asking her to forsake the vigil she has kept for Arthur. For 5 years, she has guarded the nights as if they were the last territory where his memory might still step softly beside her. To surrender to sleep feels disloyal, like closing a door she has kept open in the hope that grief might walk through it and speak his name. But then she remembers the fall, how the world had tilted and split beneath her. With a quiet, steadying breath, she reaches for the bottle. The cap is stiff under her fingers. She hesitates, heart ticking like a startled bird. Then, with a decisive twist, she opens it. The small pill falls into her palm like a stone. That night, she lies in bed for the first time in days. Clara has insisted on it. The bedroom smells faintly of lavender sachets Arthur once tucked into drawers. The quilt is neatly pulled up to her chin. She takes the pill, closes her eyes, and waits. Sleep does come, but not as a refuge. It arrives like a heavy door swinging open to a corridor she does not wish to walk. Shadows gather at the edge of her vision. She hears Arthur's voice somewhere in the distance, not warm as she remembers it, but muffled, distorted, like a recording slowed to half speed. She tries to reach for him, but the dream dissolves into a swirl of unfamiliar colors, and she wakes with a sharp gasp. Her pillow is damp. Her heart trembles against her ribs. She presses a hand to her forehead and feels the echo of something cold and strange. She had hoped for peaceful sleep. Instead, she has received a haunted imitation. The next morning, she moves through the kitchen slowly, her casted wrist aching. Clara watches her with concern as she sets down a teacup with unsteady fingers. "The pills did not help?" Clara asks quietly. "They opened the wrong doors," Eleanor says, her voice unreadable. Clara sighs. "You cannot keep living in this pattern. Mother, there are other options. You do not have to fight alone." Eleanor does not answer. She returns to her research with the tenacity of someone trying to escape through a maze built by her own hands. She reads until the words blur. She takes notes in cramped, meticulous handwriting. She tells herself that logic will save her, that knowledge will carve a path out of the labyrinth. But logic begins to feel like another kind of prison one, with tidy walls that conceal unspoken truths. One evening, while Clara is preparing dinner, she speaks in a tone that is almost casual, though the tremor beneath it is unmistakable. "There is a volunteer program," she says, her back turned as she chops vegetables. At the local animal rescue. I thought, perhaps it might help. Being around animals can be grounding. Eleanor stiffens. That is sentimental nonsense, she replies. I need solutions, not distractions. Clara pauses, then resumes chopping, her movements slower now. Sometimes connection is a solution. Eleanor gives a thin, brittle smile. I am not seeking companionship. Maybe companionship is seeking you. The words drift into the quiet, warm kitchen, like an invitation she refuses to acknowledge. Instead, Eleanor returns to her texts. She surrounds herself with books, footnotes, theories, barriers built of learned certainty. But deep inside, a small, persistent ache begins to pulse. The first recognition that data cannot mend a life gone threadbare. That logic cannot hold back the loneliness rising like winter wind through the cracks of her carefully ordered home. She closes her book. For a moment her hand trembles, and she realizes the truth she has tried to outrun. Knowledge can be carried. Grief must be lived. The kitchen is warm that evening, filled with the gentle aroma of simmering vegetables and the quiet rhythm of two people trying not to collide with their own unspoken thoughts. Outside, the winter sky has deepened into a velvet darkness, and the street lamp beyond the frosted window casts a faint amber circle on the snow. Inside, the air seems softened by the glow of the overhead light, as though the room itself is attempting to ease the strain between mother and daughter. Eleanor sits at the small wooden table, her casted wrist resting on a folded towel. She watches Clara move from counter to stove, her gestures fluid but edged with fatigue. There is a domestic intimacy to the scene, one that once was effortless, long before grief carved its quiet distance between them. The plates are set, the soup ladled. They sit across from each other, the steam rising between them like a delicate veil. For a while, they eat in silence. Not cold silence, but the kind that forms when two hearts search for gentler language. The spoon feels heavier than usual in Eleanor's uninjured hand. Her appetite is thin, but she forces herself to eat, sensing the worry behind Clara's watchful glances. It is Clara who finally speaks. "Mother," she says softly, "I have been thinking about your routine, about the nights. Maybe there are other ways to find rest, not through books, not through pills." Eleanor lifts her gaze, wary but listening. Clara hesitates, choosing her words. "I know you dismissed the idea earlier, but the animal rescue—" "No," Eleanor interrupts, though her voice lacks its former sharpness. "Please, let us not revisit that." Clara lowers her spoon, folds her hands. "It is not about volunteering anymore. I was not suggesting that." She pauses, eyes drifting toward the refrigerator. "I was only asking for a visit, nothing more. You once said Father always wanted a dog." "I remember that." The mention of Arthur lands with surprising tenderness. Eleanor's gaze flickers instinctively toward the refrigerator door. Pinned beneath a magnet shaped like a small violin is the old calendar Arthur kept, its pages faded, corners curling slightly. One square, marked in his handwriting, holds the quiet power of a forgotten season. Florence, our first trip. Her breath catches. In that simple inked note, the room seems to shift. She sees Arthur again. Coat unbuttoned, scarf loosely knotted, eyes lit with the joy of discovering a new city alongside her. She remembers the way he stood on the Ponte Vecchio at dusk, tracing the horizon with an almost reverent wonder. She remembers how he once spoke, half playfully, half earnestly, of adopting a dog, a small creature, perhaps a terrier, with a mischievous spirit. She remembers dismissing the idea, citing the chaos it would bring into their orderly lives. Orderly lives, lives arranged by schedules and syllabi. Lives that felt safe until they suddenly weren't. The memory rises like a soft, unexpected warmth, but it is followed by a deeper ache, regret's quiet shadow. Clara notices the shift in her mother's expression. She speaks again, but more gently now. "I know how much you value order, and I know how deeply you loved him. Maybe this is one thing you could do for him. Just to see. Just to try. Eleanor remains silent. The kitchen hums faintly, the refrigerator motor, the gentle settling of the old house, the muffled whisper of wind outside. She looks once more at the calendar, its faded ink a fragile remnant of a life shared. For the first time, the loss feels less like a wound and more like a door she has kept locked for too long. She pushes her spoon aside. Her casted hand trembles ever so slightly. "There is no logic to this idea," she says quietly. "Not everything meaningful is logical," Clara replies. "Father knew that better than anyone." Eleanor folds her hands in her lap, her mind moving through memories like pages in a familiar book. She sees Arthur smiling patiently when she reorganized the house, sees him reading late into the night, sees him walking through the park pointing out every dog with delighted curiosity. How easily she had dismissed those small joys. How firmly she had insisted on structure. How she had believed that order could hold a marriage together, never realizing that joy could do the same work with far greater softness. Clara's voice enters gently. "It does not have to be a commitment. We could simply go. You do not have to adopt. You do not have to stay long." Eleanor's eyes return to the calendar, to Arthur's looping handwriting. The ink seems almost luminous in the warm kitchen light. Something inside her shifts, subtle but unmistakable, like the first crack in a sheet of late winter ice. "I do not know if I can manage it," she whispers. "You do not have to manage it alone," Clara replies. "I will go with you." The promise settles softly into the room, like the first flake of spring snow that melts upon landing. Eleanor closes her eyes for a moment. When she opens them, her gaze is steadier, touched with a fragile courage she has not felt in years. "Very well," she says. "One visit." Clara smiles, tired, hopeful, and deeply relieved. The kind of smile that belongs to a daughter who has waited a long time for a door to open. They return to their meal, neither speaking of what the morning might bring. But the atmosphere has changed. The silence no longer feels like a weight. It feels like space. Space where grief remains, but where something new, something faint, and almost luminous, has begun to take shape. Outside, the night thickens. Inside, the smallest ember of possibility glows in the dim, warm kitchen, an unwritten rule of the heart stirring from its long sleep. The morning arrives wrapped in a soft, persistent rain, the kind that blurs the outlines of buildings and makes the city look as though it has been painted in watercolor. The sky hangs low, a muted gray that presses gently against the rooftops. Eleanor stands by the window, watching droplets thread their way down the glass, each one refracting the dim light into shifting patterns. She feels unsteady, though not physically. Her wrist aches, but she has grown accustomed to that. This unease is different. It gathers in her chest like a cautious flutter, neither fear nor anticipation, but some fragile mixture of both. She clutches the edge of her coat, buttoned neatly despite the indoor warmth, her composure held together by habit rather than certainty. Clara enters the room quietly. "We can leave whenever you are ready," she says. Eleanor nods once, briskly, though the gesture feels thin. She follows her daughter through the hallway, pausing only to straighten a stack of letters and adjust a picture frame by a fraction of an inch. Little acts of order, small assurances against the unpredictable world outside her door. The car ride is silent. Raindrops drum steadily against the windshield. Streets glisten with reflections of traffic lights, their colors bleeding softly into the pavement. As they drive, Eleanor keeps her gaze on the passing houses, each one a small universe with its own warmth and noise, and life worlds she has kept at a distance for far too long. When they pull into the parking lot of the adoption center, her breath catches. The building is modest, unassuming, with a bright sign above the entrance and a line of potted plants sheltered beneath the overhang. But from inside, through the glass doors, comes a jittering chorus of barks, high, low, sharp, plaintive. A cacophony of need. Eleanor stiffens. "Good heavens," she murmurs. "It sounds like a riot." Clara smiles gently. "They are just excited. Come on." Inside, The air is warm, slightly humid, carrying a mixture of wet fur, disinfectant, and something indefinably hopeful. Volunteers in bright vests hurry back and forth, carrying clipboards or towels or leashes. Dogs bark from metal kennels, each bark a different story. Cats peer from stacked enclosures, their eyes luminous in the fluorescent light. The noise presses around Eleanor like a crowded room of strangers speaking languages she does not know. Her pulse quickens. She grips her handbag tightly with her uninjured hand. A cheerful volunteer approaches. "Welcome. First time visiting?" "Yes," Eleanor replies, her tone formal, precise. "We are here only to look." "Of course. Just take your time," the volunteer says, gesturing toward the rows of kennels. They begin walking. A young beagle pup hurls itself joyfully against the bars. A large shepherd mix whines softly, tail thumping. A pair of small white dogs bark in unison, as though auditioning for a duet. Eleanor feels her senses pulled in every direction. Then, halfway down the row, she stops. In the far corner of a slightly larger kennel sits a scruffy, brownish-gray dog, with one eye clouded and the other sharp and dark as polished stone. He does not bark. He simply watches, unmoving, measuring the world from a self-made distance. The volunteer notices her pause. "Ah, that's Barnaby," she says softly. "Terrier mix. He's been with us a while. Had a rough start. He tends to choose who he trusts." Eleanor feels a faint tug in her chest, something like recognition. He looks wary. He is, but gentle, very gentle. Clara glances at her mother with quiet curiosity. "Would you like to meet him?" Eleanor hesitates. The rain outside taps lightly against the windows. Barnaby lifts his head by a fraction, his single, clear eye steady on hers, an expression neither pleading nor hopeful, but simply aware. "Yes," she says at last. "I suppose I would." They bring Barnaby into a small visiting room. He stands at the threshold a moment, then pads inside with cautious steps. His fur is wiry. One ear tilts outward, like an unfinished sketch. His gait carries the slight stiffness of old injuries, or old fears. Eleanor kneels slowly, careful of her wrist. Barnaby edges closer, sniffing the air around her coat. When she stretches out her hand, he hesitates, then places his head beneath her palm with a delicate, tentative trust that catches her off guard. Something softens inside her, as fragile as thawing ice. They spend 20 quiet minutes together. Barnaby sits close to her but not quite touching, as though acknowledging her solitude without intruding upon it. When Eleanor rises to leave, he lifts his head, a small, questioning tilt. The volunteer returns with paperwork, smiling. "If you are considering adoption, we can walk you through." "Oh," Eleanor says quickly. I am not certain." Clara places a gentle hand on her arm. "Mother, you do not have to decide today, but you seem calm with him." Calm. She had not felt calm in years. The decision is made almost without her realizing it. A few forms, a brief conversation, the signature of her good hand trembling slightly. The volunteer places a small booklet in her palm. Barnaby's records. A collar. A leash. "Congratulations," the volunteer says warmly. "He is lucky to have you." But by the time they step back into the rain, Eleanor wonders whether she has made a profound mistake. The chaos begins the moment Barnaby enters the house. He sniffs wildly at the carpet. He circles the living room. Paws skittering on polished floorboards. Within minutes, he finds a book, an old, soft-covered volume Arthur once used in lectures, and drags it triumphantly across the rug. By nightfall, he has had 2 small accidents, overturned a basket of mail, and chewed the corner of a library index card Eleanor had painstakingly written. Clara tries to soothe her. "It is the adjustment period. He is scared. He is exploring. He is dismantling my life," Eleanor says in disbelief. Her voice trembles not with anger, but with the shock of disorder after years of rigid quiet. Barnaby whines softly from the kitchen doorway, unsure whether he is the cause of her distress or its unintended witness. That night, as he cries in the hallway, Eleanor sits upright in her study, her cast heavy, her heart heavier. She presses her fingers to her temples. "What have I done?" she whispers. For the first time in 5 years, her solitude has been broken not by sorrow, but by something startlingly alive, chaotic, and demanding. She does not yet see it, but the cracks forming in her carefully ordered world are the first openings where hope will enter. 3 weeks pass, and the house undergoes a quiet, bewildering transformation. Barnaby's presence has turned each room into a landscape of small disruptions, paw prints fading across polished floors, a misplaced slipper discovered beneath the dining table, the faint rattle of a toy that mysteriously migrates from one corner to another. His needs structure her days in ways she once believed impossible. Morning walks in the pale winter light, modest meals served at steady intervals, nightly attempts to coax him into calm. And yet, for every step forward, there are 2 steps back. He cries when storms roll across the sky. He startles at distant noises. He chews anything that carries the faintest trace of human scent. Eleanor's wrist aches from the strain of holding the leash during his sudden, inexplicable bursts of energy. Still, beneath her frustration, a small, persistent thread of tenderness has begun to weave itself into her routine. But tonight is different. It is 2 o'clock in the morning, that fragile hour when the world wavers between darkness and the promise of dawn. Snow has begun to fall again, silently, drifting like pale ash past the bedroom window. Eleanor lies awake, the quilt gathered tightly around her shoulders. The house, once her sanctuary of control, now holds the restless energy of a living creature who does not understand silence. A faint whimper breaks through the dark. "Barnaby." She sits up, pressing her casted wrist against the mattress for support. Listening. The whimper comes again, uncertain, trembling. She rises, slipping her feet into slippers, and opens the bedroom door. Barnaby stands in the hallway, one paw lifted slightly, his body tense. His single bright eye reflects the dim light like a small lantern. The hall seems too big for him, as though the shadows themselves frighten him. "What is it?" she murmurs, her voice softened by instinct rather than intention. Another distant noise echoes through the neighborhood, perhaps a passing car, perhaps a metal bin shifting in the wind. Whatever it is, it unsettles him deeply. He whines and scratches lightly at the bedroom doorway, seeking what he cannot ask for in words. "No, Barnaby," she whispers. "You cannot come in." For 5 years she has refused to cross the threshold of this room, except to lie in a bed that feels half-occupied by memory. The other side, the side where Arthur once slept, has remained untouched, an unspoken boundary she has kept against the world. But Barnaby cries again, a small, desperate sound that lands somewhere deep inside her, in a place still tender with grieving echoes. "Barnaby," she says more firmly, though her voice trembles. "Go back to your blanket." He does not move. His body shakes once, a tiny shudder. His gaze holds hers with a quiet plea, unassuming, frightened, profoundly human in its vulnerability. She takes a step toward him. No, she tells herself. He must learn. But when she bends to pick him up, his small body presses instantly against her chest, warm and trembling, his heartbeat fluttering beneath her hand like a trapped sparrow. The weight of him, the simple, undeniable aliveness, collides with her in a way she cannot prepare for. This weight is not memory. It is not absence. It is not the hollow, echoing grief that has pressed upon her for years. It is warm, soft, real. She stands there, holding him, uncertain and unsteady. "Very well," she whispers, though no logic supports the decision. "Just for a moment." She carries him into the room. The air is still, touched with the faint scent of lavender and something older, almost imperceptible, a lingering trace of Arthur that she has both cherished and feared. Barnaby lifts his head, sniffing cautiously. She places him at the foot of the bed, meaning only to settle him. But he pads forward, turns once in a small circle, and presses himself against her side with a sigh so deep and trusting it breaks something inside her. She freezes. 5 years, she has kept the left side of the bed untouched. 5 years she has refused to disturb the pillow where Arthur's shadow seemed to rest. But Barnaby curls there now, a small, warm sentinel guarding the space where grief once lay unchallenged. Slowly, unbearably gently, he rests his head on her casted wrist. A breath escapes her, a soft, shuddering sound that carries within it the weight of years. She closes her eyes. The room feels different, as though the stillness itself has shifted to make space for this fragile moment. And for the first time since Arthur's death, she surrenders. Sleep rises through her like a tide not forced, not feared, but natural, inevitable. It takes her hand as though leading her across a threshold she had forgotten how to cross. She sleeps, 6 full hours, dreamless, restorative, a kind of sleep that feels like forgiveness. When morning comes, pale light reaches across the quilt. Barnaby still lies beside her, his breathing slow and steady. Eleanor opens her eyes, touches his back, and feels something new, a delicate, dawning certainty. Her journey is no longer about escaping the silence of the house. It is about accepting the presence of another soul, imperfect and needy, but steadfast. For the first time in 5 years, she rises with a sense of possibility. Barnaby stretches, tail thumping once against the sheets. "Come on then," she whispers. "Let us begin the day." Early spring arrives quietly in Toronto, slipping between the last stubborn patches of snow with a gentleness that feels almost ceremonial. The morning air is cool but no longer biting, touched with the delicate promise of thaw. Sunlight filters through bare branches in pale ribbons, bright enough to awaken color from the muted park grounds. Eleanor walks slowly along the gravel path, Barnaby trotting at her side. His gait is uneven but spirited, his single clear eye alert to every rustle, every scent carried by the soft breeze. She holds the leash lightly in her good hand, the cast removed now, her wrist still tender but healing. The park is alive with the subtle music of morning, the rhythmic flap of a distant flag, the laughter of children hidden behind budding shrubs, the rustle of early joggers passing by with measured breaths. For years, Eleanor avoided such places too public, too bright, too filled with the unpredictable energy of others. But Barnaby requires movement, requires air and earth beneath his paws, and so she follows where he leads. With each step, she feels the shape of her life shift. At a cluster of benches, a group of dog owners gather, chatting in that easy, companionable way of people accustomed to shared routines. A woman with a greyhound wrapped in a plum-colored coat offers Eleanor a warm smile. "Good morning," she calls. "Is that Barnaby? We have seen you the last few days." Eleanor hesitates. Habit urges her to nod politely and move on. But Barnaby pulls toward the group with unmistakable interest, his tail flicking in cautious arcs. "Yes," Eleanor replies, adjusting her grip on the leash. "This is Barnaby." "He is lovely," another owner, says an older man with a salt and pepper beard and a spaniel dozing at his feet. A bit shy but very dignified. Eleanor feels a quiet, unexpected warmth rise within her. "He has grown braver," she says. Soon they are speaking about breeds, training challenges, the quirks of aging joint subjects she never imagined would hold her attention. Someone asks how long she has had Barnaby, and when she answers, a soft pride threads through her voice. The conversations are brief, gentle. No one presses into her grief. No one asks about Arthur. They accept her as she appears. A woman walking her dog on a spring morning, learning once again how to inhabit the world. As the others drift away along their routes, Eleanor takes a seat on a bench beneath a budding maple. Barnaby hops beside her, paws resting on her knee, nose turned toward the scent of fresh earth. She strokes the wiry fur behind his ear. "You have brought disorder into my life," she murmurs, affection hidden beneath her measured tone. "Utter, complete disorder." Barnaby snorts softly, leaning into her touch. She looks out across the park. A squirrel darts across the grass, its tail a swift plume of energy. Barnaby jolts upright, emits a single enthusiastic bark, and bounds toward the creature as far as the leash allows. It is the first true bark she has heard from him, full, round, vibrant. The sound makes her laugh. Not a polite laugh, not a restrained laugh, but a deep, startled, genuine laugh, the kind that rises from a place long dormant. For a fleeting moment, sunlight passes through the branches and touches her face, warming the faint tracks of tears she did not realize had gathered at her eyes. They are not tears of sorrow. They are simply the overflow of something being restored. She gathers herself slowly, standing again, brushing a bit of gravel from her coat. Barnaby circles her feet, triumphant, before settling once more at her side. They walk on. As they near the edge of the park, they pass a small stand set up by a local vendor selling handmade pet accessories. A row of leashes hangs from a wooden display, braided, patterned, brightly colored. One in particular catches her attention, a deep red leash woven with threads of soft gold, warm and bold, unlike anything she would have chosen in her former meticulously ordered life. Barnaby sniffs it eagerly. The vendor smiles. A good choice for a new beginning. Eleanor hesitates for only a moment. Then she nods. Yes, she says softly. I believe it is. She purchases the leash and attaches it carefully to Barnaby's collar. It glows against his scruffy coat, a small ribbon of brightness in the early light. As they continue down the path, she feels the subtle shift of weight in her hand, less like a tether, more like a shared direction. The world ahead is no longer pristine or controlled. It is uneven, unpredictable, alive. She does not know where the path will lead. She only knows she is willing, at last, to walk it. And Barnaby, with quiet loyalty, walks beside her. Thank you for spending this time with us.